Therefore it says, wake up, sleeper. Get up from the dead. Christ will shine on you. So be careful to live your life wisely, not foolishly. Take advantage of every opportunity because these are evil times. Because of this, don't be ignorant, but understand the Lord's will. Saints of God, our eyes have seen the glory and the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage with a great wrath of storm. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I see him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dew and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on.
Oh, welcome to Conversation with Faith Leaders. My name is Brandon A.J. Davis, founder of Conversating Service and Conversation with Faith Leaders. And I'm delighted to be back with you again to share a conversation with my friend, Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin. It has certainly been a good while to this conversation. And so I'm delighted to be able to restart this conversation. And as we do so, Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin and her new book that she has released, and the title of her book is Black Indians and Freedman, the African Methodist Episcopal Church and Indigenous American 1816 to 1916. Please invite your friends, take a moment to share this conversation with families, and come on into the room that we can have a very interesting conversation with Dr. Cousin as she shares with us about her new work. Cousin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me here.
Good. I'm so glad your schedule allowed to be with us. And so I look forward to being able to have a conversation with you. I pray that the wind is up just a little bit outside. I pray that the internet behaves itself so we can have a conversation. Are you with me?
We will press on.
So we're going to pray our way through. So not to belabor the moment, I go ahead and get with first question. And again, I apologize. Weather has been acting kind of funny, and so it's in and out. I drop off just talking. I may switch between personal Wi-Fi and churches in the office to kind of keep us going. Our first question I want to ask you, first introduce yourself so that we can know more about you and your journey to this moment.
Absolutely. So I am Christina Dickerson-Cousin, and I grew up in Western Massachusetts in the Berkshires, actually. My father is Dr. Dennis C. Dickerson Sr., who is the retired historiographer of the AME Church, executive director of the Department of Research and Scholarship. So I grew up in Western Massachusetts and then moved to Nashville, Tennessee when I was in high school. And then from there went on to Spelman College, where I earned my degree in history, my BA in history, and then went to Vanderbilt University to complete my master's degree and PhD in history as well. Then I married, and I married the wonderful man, Reverend Stephen A. Cousin Jr., and moved up to New Jersey, where he pastored his first church in Bridgeton, New Jersey, a wonderful church. And then since then, we have been in New Haven, Connecticut, where he pastors Bethel AME Church. So I'm the first lady of Bethel AME Church in New Haven. And I also am an assistant professor of history at Quinnipiac University, nearby in Hamden, Connecticut. So I've been in AME my whole life, and am so happy that I was able to present this work, and hopefully it will be of value and of service to other African Methodists, because this is a denomination that I love a great deal.
So one of the things that I noticed about your book that was in terms of information about your work, and I hope you can hear me. I'm trying to switch between.
Yeah, I can.
One of the things that I noticed was that there is a view of the AME Church to be ethnically monolithic. And what surprises me is that I still run into white Americans who say to me, I didn't know you guys were Methodists. And then I run into African Americans who say, I didn't know you guys had anything to do with any other race of people but Black folks. So how did you handle that in your research and development of this book?
Well, honestly, no one really said that to me. And I certainly hope they wouldn't try to say that to me now.
Absolutely.
But it was really more through the process of doing this research that I learned a lot. I think oftentimes we get used to saying things like we're a Black church, which is certainly true, but that really does kind of paper over a lot of the rich diversity in our denominational history. And even just saying that we are a Black church, well, there's a lot of diversity within the Black community itself. What do you mean by Black? Do you mean people who have a history of enslavement in this country? Do you mean people who are from the Caribbean, people who are from the continent who maybe came here a few decades ago? So even within the Black community, there's great diversity. But certainly what I hope this book shows is that even beyond that, the AME Church has always been more expansive in its thinking, and Richard Allen was certainly expansive in his vision.
And I love that. And one of the things that is so amazing about the book is that, first of all, let me say, it never crossed my mind to put into a racial category. I just automatically had the understanding that the message of the AME Church, the existence of African Methodism, went far and wide. I know that there has been research. I can't call her name. She is a PhD. She has done research about the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Latin America.
Christina
Davidson, yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
yes,
she's
ma'am.
great.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. She and I were a part of, it was during the pandemic, it was the first of the AME Reviews conversations, if you will. She and I served together in the inaugural conversation, virtual conversation. And so she brought to my attention through her research, and thankful that she shared some of that with me, about African Methodism in Latin America and in North and South America. And so I just automatically had the idea that, one, the race of Black people is made up of a mixture of everything. There is no one congruent or just singular race, just Black people. We have a lot of other ethnicities within us. But as I got your book and I began to dive through it, it really touched my heart to know that we actually had AME churches on the reservation. Native Americans active within the AME Church. So I want to thank you for your research. Thank you for taking time out to be with us today. And so let me ask you this first question. What were the motivating factors for conducting the research that led to this book? And I know that there was, I think, from college to your PhD, is that a 10-year span?
It was a journey.
Okay.
So I went to Spelman in 2000. And actually, believe it or not, I started out as a music performance major.
Wow.
And I was going to be a violin performance major, and then for a variety of reasons decided not to do that and became a history major. And so towards the end of that degree, I took a class in Native American history. And I found it so fascinating, and it just kind of really opened my eyes to a lot more that I had not been aware of. And so then I took a year off in between college and graduate school. And during that year off, I spent time working in my father's office. I mentioned previously that my father is now the retired executive director of the Department of Research and Scholarship. And so part of what his job was to provide people with historical information about their churches, etc. So oftentimes people would call up the office and say, hello, I'm from, Bethel Church in wherever, and we're doing our church anniversary. Can you give us some information about our church from your archives? And so oftentimes I would handle those historical requests. And so when I wasn't doing that, I would look at the microfilm reader and look at old Christian recorders. And I just found this so interesting. To me, it is the closest thing we're going to get to a time machine, to go back and really kind of plop yourself in a different time period. And so as I was just going through, just reading, just for fun, I kept coming across the term Indian Mission Conference. And I had never heard of that before. As I mentioned before, I'm a lifelong AME, but I had never heard of that before. And so I just got interested in what that meant. And so I did, some research, some preliminary research in the Christian Recorder and a bit beyond that, and wrote a very short article for the AME Church Review. And then, went on to graduate school, did a completely different topic for my dissertation. And then when I completed my PhD, I attempted to get, some of my dissertation published and get, a postdoc, and just nothing really seemed to gel with that. So I said, okay, well, maybe it's time to go back to this interesting topic that I had looked at before. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to go full on into that. And I did so, when it took, many, many years of research to get to the point where it was book ready. But that's really how it started. It's a book about the AME Church, and the origins of the book really are in the historiographer's office looking at old Christian recorders. So these primary sources are invaluable, not only for our own just enjoyment and edification, but they provide a wealth of information for those who, will look. And I can imagine many other books that can be birthed from looking at old Christian recorders.
Let me tell you, looking at old Christian recorders is what I do when I'm trying to go to sleep at night. When I think I'm going to go to sleep and I end up laying in the bed and I'm awake still, I get on Google and I just start Googling different things, and I'll run across these old articles that other websites have posted. And I'm here to tell you what a blessing it is, because it has shaped my understanding of history about our denomination. Now, until I got your book, until I saw the advertisements that your book was coming out, and brothers and sisters, let me tell you, the book is available via Amazon. Go to Amazon, or you can contact her and you can get the book, $35. She will send it to you. You might even get her to autograph it. But please get the book. If you want to know about African Methodism and about African Methodism and indigenous people, you want to get it from a person who's not just AME, but who got the experience of research, having worked in her father's office. And we salute Dr. Dennis Clark Dickerson for his work that he has done. And we are very appreciative for what he does. Now, I didn't know until I saw the advertisements. When I saw the advertisement for your book, I had no idea that we had this stuff. I didn't know we had a relationship with Native Americans, with indigenous people. Didn't know anything about it. So before I go to question 2, do we still have that relationship today?
To my knowledge, there is no specific outreach to indigenous people. There are certainly people, indigenous people in the church in Oklahoma. I could talk a bit more about it later, but Lonnie Johnson, who I spent a lot of time with, he has recently passed about a year ago, but I spent a lot of time with him and his family and talking to him, and his ancestors were enslaved by Chickasaw Choctaw people. So he was in the church, he was a presiding elder, and he has, children and grandchildren as well. And so there are certainly people within the church who have that heritage, but as far as I know, there's no specific ministry to those people in Oklahoma or elsewhere. And thank you, Ms. Wright. So nice to see you.
Listen, I love Dr. Wright. She is a wonderful person. Let me thank Nikki Sanders, my mom, First Lady Francietta Nadine Allen of in Cincinnati. and Dr. Wright, they are great supporters of this show, and they're always present to support what I'm trying to do. And I love that she has read your book now 3 to 4 times.
Oh, I didn't even see it. Thank you, Dr. Wright. That's so nice.
Absolutely. She says she has read it 3 to 4 times. Your book addresses several fascinating topics and invites research on several related topics. So now let me ask you this question. Let me ask you this question as I try to remember what my questions are. Here we go. So what are some of your experiences while conducting your research? I did notice from the book that you actually spent time with a presiding elder. Is that correct? Who formerly?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, let me talk a bit more about that. So, God rest him, Lonnie Johnson. He was a pastor and a presiding elder in the church, and his ancestors actually came to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, and they were enslaved by Chickasaw and Choctaw people, and so he, grew up in Oklahoma with those experiences and those stories. And he had really long since wanted to share everything that he knew, but had not been able to find kind of a venue to share all of this. I mean, certainly he shared it with people, in Oklahoma, but he certainly wanted a wider audience and more African Methodists to know about it. So I was able to get in contact with him. And then in 2015, I can't believe how long ago that was now, but in 2015, I flew out to Oklahoma City and visited with him and his family. He drove me around. He drove me to Atoka, Boggy Depot, and we did, long, extensive interviews. And he just taught me everything he knew about the history of the AME Church in Oklahoma, which was then called Indian Territory. And so using a lot of that information, that gave me a great, jumping off point to, then go back into census records. And I was able to corroborate what he had told me. So it's one thing to just have oral history and have someone tell you something, but I was able to corroborate what he told me. So, and when I told him that, no, really, you were right. And whoever told you this, your grandmother who told you this, she was right. I mean, here's the evidence right here. And he said, oh, wow, that's amazing. So he provided me a wealth of information. So that was one aspect of it. But then there was, a host of other research that I had to do. What made this challenging and what makes, people who study African Americans and Indigenous people, what makes that challenging is that oftentimes all of the information isn't in just one place. It's not as if you can just go to, one library and everything is there. You have to go to a lot of different kinds of places. So the Oklahoma part, that was, really fruitful. And then I also had to do a lot of just archival research, looking in census records, annual conference minutes, AME annual conference minutes. That is really where so much of the meat is found, because it's in annual conference minutes that you get lists of names, the names of people who belong to these churches. Then you can say, okay, well, I know this person belonged to this church. Let me see if I can find them in the census records. Then if you find them in the census records, maybe you find out who their spouse is and who their children are. And then you can research through that. So doing that kind of very slow research, that's why it takes, it takes a long time. That's why it took a good bit of time to complete the research, because there's so much to find. Also, what I was, proud about in terms of this book is that in addition to highlighting aspects of AME history that we don't know, I was able to shed some light on AME figures we do know. So Jarena Lee, someone that every African Methodist knows of, she did some of her early evangelization among Indigenous people. And that was right there in her autobiographical work. That was not something I uncovered in a secret place. It's right there in black and white. It's been available for, decades and decades. But because I had that training in Native American history, I was kind of in tune with finding those kinds of materials. And so then I was able to kind of flesh out more about her as well. So a lot of research went into this, a lot of different threads, a lot of different places, a lot of different kinds of sources. But what I hope readers will appreciate is that, this is a heavily researched book. You're never going to have everything you want. Of course, I wish I had, the Lost Diaries of Jarena Lee somewhere, or the Lost Diaries of Richard Allen. But barring that, you just do as much research as you can. And, thankfully, I was able to do a good bit of it.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Dickerson-Cousin. the receptiveness of the indigenous people is something that I should say in my readings and in my research I would say is widely known. Um, History have shown how receptive they were. Even with the landing of the Mayflower, it shows how open and receptive they were. Language barriers, a white man coming to these shores unknown to them, never seen before. But as you read, I can't call his name right now, Zavi. He's a famous historian, um, an older famous historian. Zavi, I can't call his name right now. I have the book in front of me. But as you read some of his work, there's one thing that sticks out is that they have been a receptive, open people. Even today, I have a personal friend who suffered tremendous financial loss, who was an AME pastor. Is today now, thank God, but during his period of not being an AME pastor, found safety and security, a home and food on a reservation with Native Americans who took him in. And so that openness and that receptiveness is amazing. Talk to us about how they were open to becoming AMEs and how they welcomed us in. As you said, books about Jarena Lee are part of the Board of Examiners. That's one of the first things you learn coming into the Board of Examiners when we begin the history courses in class of admissions in year one. You talk about Jarena Lee. You talk about her journey and her experience. And so you learn that she did a lot of her preaching, her circuit preaching on those reservations, and they were open and receptive to having her. Can you just speak to for a moment about their openness and receptiveness to being AMEs?
Well, firstly, it's important to recognize that there is great diversity among indigenous nations, that there is no one indigenous response. There are hundreds and hundreds of indigenous nations. There were then, there are today. Within those nations, there is linguistic, ethnic, cultural diversity. So there isn't just one response or just one, yet no one response to African Methodism or anything else. The specific situations that I was able to look at, for example, Jarena Lee, the specific people who she went among. So for example, I'll take the Wyandot. So she goes among the Wyandot in, I believe it's 1830. They had previously had an experience with a Black Methodist named John Stewart. And John Stewart was actually the first to create a permanent Methodist mission among indigenous people. And so he's a Black man. So the fact that here's this Black man who is doing that was inspirational to Jarena Lee. And she talked about how he inspired her. And so when she goes among the Wyandot, they had already had an experience with Black Methodism. John Stewart eventually does defect towards the end of his life and becomes an African Methodist. So this was not their first time seeing a Black minister. And so that could play into why they were willing to, bring her in and hear what she had to say. When we talk about in the later period in Indian Territory, that too is very complex. There is a long and perilous history of Christianity among indigenous people. Oftentimes, missionaries would come and try to force people to convert and, put all kinds of stipulations around it. So it's a complex history. What I'm seeing with African Methodism is that in the case of when they went to Indian Territory, they were actually invited. So Annie Keel, who was one of Lonnie Johnson's ancestors, when freedom came, she said, okay, well, we want to have our own institutions. The AME Church is something that I want to have here. And so she invited the AME Church in. So really among her community of Black and indigenous people, there was great receptivity to the AME Church. And I highlight that in my book. That certainly doesn't mean that every indigenous person in Indian Territory was receptive to it. There were many who certainly were not. But among the specific populations that the African Methodists went to, yes, there certainly was receptivity, and you have to look at the sort of larger context that explains that. John Hall, for example, John Hall was this Ojibwe minister who in the 1890s joined the AME Church. And so he explains why he did that. He explains why he was receptive to African Methodism. He said that basically we are in this situation where we are being forced to convert, we're being forced to give up aspects of our culture. But among the African Methodists, among our Black cousins, we're able to worship the way we feel comfortable worshiping. He says, essentially, when the Great Spirit comes into our heart, we're able to express that. If we were doing that among the whites, they would tell us to go outside, but we feel more comfortable with our cousins, our Black cousins. And so again, it's, you know, it's very specific, depends on what specific time period you're talking about, what people you're talking about. But there certainly were people who found the AME Church as a refuge against what they viewed as an otherwise hostile, larger American society.
So one of the things that I paid attention to in your book, there was one specific bishop that I don't know much about, which is saying a lot for Brandon Davis, because that's just something as a kid, I was just fascinated when my cousin, the late Reverend Bruce Sampson, gave me my first discipline, a paperback 1992 discipline. And I was flipping through it and I'm like, wow, this is some Black folks do this. And I'm saying this as a child. Like we got rules, we got regulations. And then I get in the back of the book and I'm looking at the pictures of these bishops and their faces are speaking to me. And I'm learning these people as I become an adult, who these people are and what they brought to the church. Then I meet your dad. And I'm learning more and more about African Methodism that I never knew. But I don't know a lot about Bishop William T. Vernon.
William Tecumseh Vernon, okay. Yeah, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pronounce his middle name?
William Tecumseh Vernon.
Okay, so I'm learning that in 1907, Oklahoma has like Jim Crow laws. I guess it's a part of their constitution or their statehood.
That was the first law they passed.
The first law they passed.
In the state, yeah.
And so they have these Jim Crow laws. And Bishop Vernon, was he bishop at that time?
No, not yet.
He was just a pastor in Oklahoma.
Right.
And so
wait a minute. No. Hold on. What year are you talking about?
1907.
Okay. So yeah, so by then I'm sorry, go ahead with what you were gonna ask.
So what I wanted to ask was additionally was, so he's leading a protest in Oklahoma to fight against these Jim Crow laws. And this is a protest, if I got it correctly, takes them to Washington, D.C.
Okay, so what actually happens is, so he is in the administration, actually. So he is working in Washington. And while he's there, that is when the Oklahoma state constitution kind of comes up. And there are Black Indigenous people who go to Washington and say, hi, Bishop, Mr. Vernon, can you help us out? He's not bishop yet, but can you help us out? Because they're trying to pass these Jim Crow laws. And so he does. He welcomes them. He helps them. And he tries to ensure that this, segregation law won't pass. It ultimately does. But those Black Indigenous people remembered that Vernon had helped them. And so then a few years later, when he is appointed as like the superintendent over schools in Indian Territory, and there's all this racist backlash to it, they remember that too. And they remember he was the guy who helped us out. He was the guy who was on our side. And so in 1911, they name a town after him, Vernon, Oklahoma.
And not only did they do that, if I got it right here, they're the all-Black town of Taft, founded on the allotment of Creek Freedman, and named a school after, as it says here, the high-achieving African Methodists.
Yes.
The W.T. Vernon School, which began its operations in 1908, and Sarah Rector was among its students. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me how the relationship of the AME Church takes us to places that many of us never thought it would. We have high-ranking officials let me just say it this way. High-ranking officials have always worked in the political system or infrastructure of the government of the United States of America.
Certainly.
We have representatives, we have congressmen, we have senators, we have judges, lawyers, we have all of these persons who've done this great work. And when you go back as far as where you have gone, I'm so sorry, someone's trying to call me, and I thought I had this thing on Do Not Disturb. When you go as far as you have gone in your research, you have provided for us a lens of understanding about how important the AME Church has played in the role of democracy in this country. I just want to say again, thank you for introducing me to another part of African Methodism that I did not know. And let me just tell you this. This is a sincere high praise. In light of what's happening, and I want to say this with respect and sensitivity, in light of what's going on, this is a good thing. This is a good thing. So thank you. We're going to take a quick moment. Let me recognize two of our sponsors, and then we're going to come right back with our conversation as we continue with Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin, the author of Black Indians and Freedmen. You got to get the book. Go to Amazon.com. I know y'all got Prime, so go ahead and get your copy of the book. Get it on Prime so you can get it fast and you can start reading. And maybe you'll be able to catch up with Dr. Patricia Wright because she's already written the time. So y'all go ahead and do that.
Praise him with a violin.
Welcome. I'm Alphonse Allen, the senior pastor of Allen Temple AME Church.
And I'm personal injury attorney Blake Maislin, partnering together to bring you the Allen Temple broadcast.
Every Sunday morning at 11:30 on Star 64. We're reaching the city one soul at a time.
And now we're inviting you to join us.
Every Sunday morning at 11:30 on Star 64.
And so we are back with Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin, who is the author of Black Indians and Freedmen's. You got to get this book. If you have a sincere interest in history, you want to go to Amazon, you want to get this book, Black Indians and Freedmen, the African Methodist Episcopal Church from 1816 to 1916. Get the book. It's going to make you think. It's going to make you, for all of you AMEs, it's going to make you feel very, very proud that we got this in our church. I love the AME Church. I am AME born, and when I die, I'll be AME dead, as if that part matters, but still, you get the point. I love my church. I love my church. And I'm so glad that we have this type of scholarly work in our denomination. Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin is also a first lady. She's married to an AME preacher. She is not only the daughter of our historiographer, retired Dr. Dennis Clark Dickerson Sr., but she's also married to an AME preacher. Reverend Cousin is the son of Bishop Philip Robert Cousin, grandson of Bishop.
That's
Philip
a grandson.
Legacy, former senior bishop of the AME Church. So we have this love for our church. And when you love the church, you do what you can for the church, especially for the expansion of the church's legacy. And Dr. Cousin, you have done that with this book. So let me go ahead and ask you this question. Explain to us, and this, I love words. I'm a linguist. I am my mother's logopher. She calls me her logopher. I love words. Explain triangular integration and how relevant it is to the mission of the AME Church today.
Well, what I meant by that term was that we have, it speaks to the ethnic diversity within the denomination. That we have, of course, African American people, and obviously that's a complicated term, but African Americans. We have Indigenous people, and again, they are very diverse as well. And then you also have a small but significant number of white people in the AME Church. So I spend a lot of time talking about a man named James Fitzalan-Sisson, who was one of these people in AME history who, has been hiding in plain sight. If you go back into, Paine's history of the AME Church, you'll see his name, but you wouldn't automatically really know who he was. So that's really what I'm getting at, that you have these three main, ethnic groups. Of course, there's diversity within them, but these three ethnic groups, African American, Indigenous, and white, all in the AME Church, and all playing a different role in the expansion of the denomination. So if you will permit me, I'd like to say a bit more about James Fitzalan-Sisson, because I was very excited to learn about him through this research. So James Fitzalan-Sisson was born in Massachusetts and apparently started out as a pharmacist. And then after the Civil War ended, he migrated to the South, like many whites did, to help the freedmen. And so he spends time in Virginia, in Maryland, and is, really his life is threatened many times during the course of his efforts. He ends up in Catoosa County, Georgia, where he is, helping to open freedmen schools and all those things. And he is, again, really threatened by white vigilantes. And it gets so bad that he actually appeals to President Ulysses S. Grant to help him. He writes this long letter that, seriously, these people are going to kill me. Can you send help? So either Grant, didn't send help or he didn't send enough. But either way, James Fitzalan-Sisson felt that he had to leave Georgia to save his life. And he ends up in Arkansas. And so while he's in Arkansas, he ends up going to Indian Territory, because Arkansas is, near Indian Territory. And so he spends time there, spends several years evangelizing there and establishing schools and churches. And then in 1878, he actually tells the Arkansas Annual Conference that, look, enough work has been done here at this point that it's probably time that the Indian Territory has its own separate annual conference. And so they agree. And so in 1879, the Indian Mission Annual Conference is established. James F.A. Sisson is there at that inaugural meeting, and then spends, many more years in Indian Territory. And because of all of his efforts, and he writes many letters to the Christian Recorder, that's how I know a lot of this information. But during the course of that, people appreciate him so much that they name their flagship school after him, the Sisson Industrial Institute in Muskogee. And so it eventually changes its name, but initially it is named the Sisson Industrial Institute. And so he eventually ends his ministry in Mississippi. But part of why Sisson is so important is not only because he's a white man who is assisting freedmen. I mean, that is something we've all heard before, that after the Civil War, whites, come down to the South and help African Americans. What's unique about his story is that he didn't say, okay, I'll, give you some money and, I'll work within a white denomination and just try to help you all out. He said, no, I'm going to join. I'm going to get ordination in a Black denomination. And I am going to be subordinate to what my bishop tells me to do. At the time, his bishop was Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. So if Bishop Turner tells me to go this place, then I'll go this place. If Bishop Turner tells me to do this, I will do this. And so that is not something we see a lot, where we see a white person in this time period saying, not only am I in support of African Americans, but I'm willing to show everyone that I think this organization is so important, that I think African Americans can run their own institutions, that I'm willing to, kind of be underneath their leadership. And so that is something, again, we just don't see a lot, certainly not in this period. And this is part of why I believe he ends up really in a lot of physical danger. I mentioned in the book how one time he goes to annual conference in New England and shows the bullets that were lodged in his house, saying that this is what people are doing to me. These people are trying to kill me, but I don't care. I believe in this denomination and I want to be a part of it. So I think he is just a really interesting person, and it's just a dynamic that I have not seen before, where a white person, joins a Black denomination in this period and subordinates himself to Black ecclesiastical authority, to his Episcopal leader.
And what's interesting about him not just joining the church, but the fact that he ingratiated himself in the work of the church without trying to change the church to be more like white people. He wasn't trying to influence the church to, well, I think you guys ought to do it this way, or maybe you should handle it this way. He joined the church as is, and he helped to advance its ministry, its mission, without trying to change the narrative or the scope of what God has called us to do as AMEs. Dr. Patricia Wright asked a question. She wants to hear about the outreach to the Indigenous, and I'm guessing, Dr. Wright, you're asking, is that a present day question? What about the outreach to the Indigenous today? So hopefully she'll respond back in, but I wanted to make sure that we did, Dr. Wright, we did see your question on YouTube. So now, one of the things that people, colleagues of mine who are not AME, Dr. Cousin, who joke with me, but they really are sincere. They asked the question, do y'all have white members today? Yes, we do. There are several white persons I know in the 3rd Episcopal District who pastor, who preach. I know there are pastors. There's a presiding elder in the 13th Episcopal District, and there are preachers and pastors in the 1st Episcopal District who are white, who are AME, who do great work for the church. There was a joke that I've heard Dr. Eric Brown tell this in his book, the vocabulary. It's the dictionary of terms in the AME church. And I've heard him talk about Bishop Cornelius T. Schaefer. And
yes,
during his run for the episcopacy, someone made the statement that I think it's time that we elect one of our white brothers to the episcopacy.
He was like, who?
And they elected Cornelius T. Schaefer as the 29th bishop of the AME church. Ironically, incidentally, Bishop Schaefer, there's a church named in his honor. Today, that church is 106 years old. Schaefer Chapel AME Church in McIntyre, Ohio. And I've been to the church. I've driven past the church. I know the pastor very well. She and I were at Payne Theological Seminary together, where we both got our MDivs. And the church is still in existence, and the city of McIntyre and Bloomingdale celebrated them for this marking of their 106th church anniversary. Let me ask you this question. Are there any expected outcomes from your research to foster new relationships between the AME church and Indigenous people?
Well, that's really up to the church, I guess. I would hope that what the book does is lay a template that says this outreach to people who do not identify as African American, whether that is people who are Hispanic, whether that is people, of whatever ethnicity. Hopefully what this book shows is that there is precedent for that. That is normative within AME history. That is not something that if you tell someone, well, I want to do some evangelization among, this Hispanic community that's in my town, people shouldn't look at you like, oh, really? Why? Because no, that is very much in line with what Richard Allen, I argue, that was his vision. And that I argue in the book that really this outreach to Indigenous people was also a part of that broader vision. So I would hope that it encourages ministers and members to look more broadly at who can be a part of this denomination. The African and African Methodist isn't meant to be exclusionary at all. And historically, it has not, been an inhibitor. As the book shows, there have been Indigenous people welcomed within the denomination. As I showed in chapter 2, you have Indigenous ministers like Thomas Sunrise and John Hall. And so there is certainly precedent for that kind of outreach and for accepting people of a variety of different ethnicities within the denomination. So that should not be something that people say, oh, wow, is that something new we're doing? No, that goes all the way back to the beginning.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
So I would encourage you, if you know some, more and more communities in Aliquippa who would love to be African Methodists, I would encourage you to, to think broadly about that and who could be a part of, your own wonderful congregation.
And that's the beautiful thing about the AME Church. When we look back retrospectively about how we built the AME Church, we didn't just build the AME Church just by sticking to our own, because we know fully well what it means to be a subjugated people, to be a sequestered people, to be a race that is, hated upon and killed, held in slavery. And then to some degree, people thought that we were held in slavery in perpetuity and to be passed down within somebody's will. I'm a will you, John Smith. When I die, he's yours. He's going to keep working for this family and his children's children and so forth. What I like about the fact is that the AME Church recognized that the idea of African Methodism did not belong to us. And to now have in our possession this research that has been finely tuned, giving to us, you and your father has done a great job. Let me just take a moment to thank the Dickerson family for doing a wonderful job in helping us to preserve the history of the AME Church, helping us to know the history of the AME Church. Grateful for the AME Review, grateful for the research. Dr. Dickerson's new book about the African Methodist Episcopal Church, produced by Oxford University. Get your hands on the book.
Cambridge.
Thank you. Say it again.
Oh, Cambridge University Press for his book.
In Oxford, Cambridge University, excuse me. Get your hands on the book. Go through your archives on Facebook. His children did a great review of the book, of which I was a part of. Amen.
Episode 2.
Had a great time talking about his work. And let's do the same thing for your book. I hope your brother, my frat, is doing the same thing for your book. I'm game. Assign me my chapter now. I'm ready.
Okay. I'll give you chapter 3.
Listen, give me chapter 3. I'm ready. Let's bring back this review of your book. Let's bring your dad in on it. Tell my frat, hey, let's do this for his sister, his big sister.
Okay.
Your brother Dennis Jr. is the baby boy, right? He's the only boy,
he's the
but
youngest.
he's the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So baby bro, let's do this for big sis, and let's other sisters in on this because I think it is needed. Because in light of where we are, there's so much happening within our community that involves race. I think this would be a wonderful conversation. I have later next month, Mark Charles, who is the author. I'm having a full day today of not remembering anything. Mark Charles wrote a book, Lord have mercy. And now I'm having a hard time remembering anything today. Unsettling Truth. That's the name of the book. It's him and another author. But I have Mark Charles on this show next month to talk about his book, because it is so important to talk about where we are as we deal with all of these race relations in the country. So again, thank you for that. We're going to take a quick break and then we're going to finalize this conversation. Dr. Cousin, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. You have given me so much joy. The lay folks at the AME Church has blessed me today. And you fit in the lay category. You have blessed me today.
We do what we can.
You guys do it all. My brother, Dr. Anderson, did a wonderful job speaking for us today for our Lay Witness Sunday. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Amy, for allowing your member to come to be with us today. We appreciate you, Pastor. We'll be right back.
Recently, God opened the door for J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services to expand into the Madison, Florida area. allowing us to provide stellar yet affordable services to families in need, families who are looking to honor the life of their loved one in the customs and traditions of our cultural experience. J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services offers compassionate and courteous service with unmatched satisfaction and a professional staff that can serve your family in a difficult time with dignity. The top 11 reasons why families call J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services are that we offer funeral services, cremation services. We have an on-premise chapel. We have J.P. Silk Creations, our on-premise florist. We offer grief counseling. We have 24-hour on-call service, at-home arrangements, out-of-town services. We have digital casket display. We offer air flight shipping. And we have reasonable and competitive pricing with a complimentary notary public. Spreading sunshine at the sunset of life. J.P. Moore Mortuary and Cremation Services. The mortician who cares more.
And we are back with Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin, finalizing our conversation today about her work. And so, again, I want to encourage every last one of you, you need to head over to Amazon and you need to purchase this book. You want to get this book in your library and you want to start having these conversations amongst your AME friends. And those of us who have relationships in the community, let's start sponsoring other conversations, because that is a wonderful way, as she just outlined, to how we could grow our church, because this is the Freedom Church. This is the church of social change. This is the church of a social protest that wasn't based on just the treatment of African Americans, but we based it on the theological premise that we are God's people too. And so you want to get this book. Thank you, Dr. Wright. We have her question. So Dr. Wright asked question number 1, Dr. Cousin, you ready? You said the AME Church was first invited in by freedmen, former black slaves, and mixed race, black plus indigenous persons. To what extent did the church reach out to or attempt to proselytize indigenous persons who were not black or mixed race?
Excellent question. So it's a complicated answer. So I assume you're referring specifically to what happens in Indian Territory. So while there are some examples of people who were not black or mixed race joining the AME Church in Indian Territory, for example, I note there was one church called Bethel on the Point that quote unquote had full-blooded members. So that is a term. It's not a term I like to use very much in our modern context, but it was the term they used at the time to refer to people who were indigenous rather than people who were black and indigenous. And so I certainly have that example of Bethel on the Point that had those members. But overall, you do not see a lot of success with members of the quote unquote 5 civilized tribes joining the AME Church. And part of that, as I explain in the book, is because of the legacy of slavery among the 5 tribes. So it certainly would not be likely if someone who owned African American, who owned these people, would suddenly want to join a black church and sit alongside them. That's just not a likely thing to have happen. But it doesn't mean the AME Church didn't try. The AME Church was there, and the denomination did get support from the tribes. So in the Choctaw Nation, for example, they were given a building that the AME Church converted into what was then known as Green Rock AME Church. So, and they were also given access to land where they could build a school. So there was, some support from the different tribes, but based on my research, you don't see a lot of people from the tribes who are not black and mixed race joining the denomination. So hopefully that answers your question.
So
and
now,
whereas she got questions too.
Go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of the contrast I draw a bit. So the first half of the book really looks more at the North, and then the rest of the book looks at Indian territory where there is this legacy of slavery. So certainly you get different, different dynamics in those places.
So she's actively in your book. So question 2, the book discusses in detail an Indigenous preacher who became an AME minister as well as a minister in other denominations. He seemed to have preached widely in white and black communities in the Northeast. Is there any evidence that he also remained an active member of his own community and proselytized on the reservation?
I'm assuming that you're talking about Thomas Sunrise, who was Oneida, from the Oneida Nation. And to my knowledge, I'm just not, beyond what I expressed in the book, I'm just not sure of what else he did in terms of his own Oneida community. He did certainly move around a lot throughout the Northeast, so it's certainly likely that he remained in close contact with people from his own Oneida Nation. But I just don't have a lot of, information beyond what I shared in the book. I wish I did. I wish I had even more. But in terms of what I have, it's, basically what I shared in the book.
Absolutely. So now, as we end our conversation, I want to ask you this final question. What would you like the takeaway to be from persons reading your work?
Well, I would say I have 2 main takeaways. The first is that, as I've said before, that AME history is, much more diverse than we often think, that there is a lot more to AME history than just the, 5 or so people that we all know about. We've all heard of Allen and Turner and Payne and Jarena Lee, and all those people are very important, but there is a lot more AME history to know, which leads to my second takeaway, which is that I hope that this book interests other AMEs in doing their own research, finding their own research projects. Maybe something you read in my book, piques your interest about something. And then maybe you say, well, let's see if I can find something about this. And you never know where that could take you. So there is a lot more AME history to learn, a lot more AME history to know. I hope that my book contributes to that, but it should not be the end. It should be, one of, many studies that I hope to see AME scholars doing over the coming years.
Listen, this has been fun. I have really enjoyed our time together. I want to thank Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin, who is the assistant professor. Pronounce the name of the school.
Quinnipiac.
Quinnipiac. I was close. I'm not going to tell you what was in my mind, but I was close. My North Carolina twang got the best of me on that one. But she is the assistant professor at Quinnipiac University, and she is the author of Black Indians and Freedmen, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, 1816 to 1916. Go to Amazon, get the book, call her. You can send it to her. $35. I think it includes the shipping. She'll get you an autographed copy. Add this book to your library. This is what we want. If I was a parent, I would feel that this is what parents want from their children, to do their own research about the church that they raised them in, so that they can have an appreciation and show that appreciation to those who will follow after them from years to come. And so I pray your sons will appreciate this work when they become adults.
I hope so.
Dr. Cousin, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I'm serious. If you all decide to bring back those conversations as we look through your book, I'm ready for chapter 3. So call me. I'm ready to go because I'm excited about this work. So again, thank you so much for being with me today.
And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. As always, I would like to offer to you just a thought to share with you as we end our conversation. And this quote actually comes from a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Ernest F. Ledbetter. And I think this quote is probably, as my sister said to me when I shared it with her, this is probably the best thing I'm going to hear all year. There comes a time when every line counts, every word matters, and there can be no wasted space. Even our pauses have to mean something. I want to send out prayers, and I pray that these prayers motivate people to action for the people in Uvalde, Texas. Prayers for those in Buffalo, New York. Prayers for those in California. Prayers for people all over this country who are dealing with the loss of life as it relates to gun violence. We are living in strange and difficult times, but I believe that God is present and is fully aware of what is happening. And I pray that as you pray, your prayers lead you to actions. But the Bible tells us faith without works is dead. And repentance requires changed behavior. And so I pray and call upon our congressional political leaders to repent for your lacking in doing something to keep our children alive. Repent for playing politics. Repent from being in the pockets of gun lobbyists whose only concern is the dollar and the gun. We need you to create laws. We need you to institute laws. They work in other countries. 26 years and counting was a shooting at a school in the UK. They created a law. They put systems in place. They haven't had any mass shootings in 26 years. Laws do work. Rules can work. We need our leaders to repent for not doing so, and we need you to wake up and do it. So again, we want to invite you to pray for those persons who have suffered from the violence of gun violence and who are dealing with the loss of life as it relates to gun violence. Come back. We will be here again on June 26th, I believe it is. Yes, June 26th. We will be here with Mark Charles, who is the author of Unsettling Truths. You don't want to miss that conversation. He is an Indigenous person who is bringing awareness to the rights of the Indigenous folks in this country. And so you don't want to miss that conversation. Go to Amazon, get Dr. Cousin's book first, and then go and get his book, Unsettling Truths. But you want to buy Dr. Cousin's book first because I said so. Again, we thank you for taking time to be with us today. We will be bringing more conversations in the near future. I know we've been on hiatus, but we will get back into the swing of things. And so we look forward to seeing you. Stay safe. Continue to wear your mask. It is still a pandemic out there. Clean your hands with good sanitizer and good soap, as my grandmother would say. Socially distance and stay blessed. Stay safe is my prayer.